Hello, it's Miss Coletta here, and today I would like to discuss with you how to use your calculator to perform what's called an iteration. An iteration is just when we repeat the same process over and over again in the calculator. A lot of times when we're doing calculations, we want to repeat it and predict for another year or another day or another situation. An iteration is what allows us to do this repetition quickly. We can use some calculator shortcuts to repeat the process so we don't have to re-enter everything over and over again. So looking specifically at one of the examples that we've been working with recently, we're looking at Unit 2, Lesson 2, Investigation 1, where we predicted the U.S. population. And what we had to do was we had to calculate the population change based on birth rates and death rates and immigration. And we had to retype the same calculations several times to produce our estimates. Now, we've come up with something at this point called a now-next equation. And it looks something like this. If you remember, this helps us get from whatever our amount is now to the next. So in this case, to the next year. So it's going to help us predict our population. Based on the population right now, we can predict next year's population. If you remember where these numbers came from, this is the percent change converted to a decimal. It was a growth rate of 0.7%, and this was the immigration, an extra 0.9 million people every year. The now start value is where we started at, which is 248, and more specifically, we should probably specify it's 248 million people. So, with that now next equation, we are ready to go ahead and get started on what exactly we do to perform iteration. Now, when you want to produce the same work over and over again in the calculator, you can help clue your calculator into what we'll use as our now value. And the way we do this then is once we perform the calculations once, we just have to hit enter a few times in order for the calculator to produce the same process as many times as we want. So, here's our general steps right here. First, we determine our now next equation and our now start value, which we've already done. Then we're ready to jump to the calculator. Type our now start and press enter. Type our now next equation using answer everywhere we see now, and that will make sense once I show you the calculator. And then we hit enter, and each time we hit enter, we are performing what we call iteration. So I'm just going to bring our now next equation over so that we can place it in number 1. And now that we have our now next equation here and ready for us to use, we are ready to go ahead and use the calculator. So you'll notice here in step 2, the first thing we want to do is type the now start and press enter. So I know in my calculator, I'm just going to make a note of what we're going to do in this step. My now start is 248, so I'm going to type 248 and then I'm going to press the enter button. And I will take you to the calculator to do that. Okay, so here on my calculator I'm typing 248 and I'm hitting enter. And what we're doing here is basically telling our calculator, hey, this number, this 248, is important. I want you to remember it. So we're basically storing it in the calculator by doing this 248 and then hitting enter. And what we want our calculator to remember is that's our starting population. That's our population right now at the beginning of the problem. So let's go ahead and check out what the next step tells us to do. And the next step tells us to type the now next equation using answer everywhere you see now. So if you look here, the now is being multiplied by 1.007. And then we're adding 0.9. So if I hop over to the calculator, now there's kind of 2 ways to do this. You can type it exactly the way it appeared, 1.007 times, and then we would put the word answer in because that's how the calculator would recognize what to do. Or you can just say, oh, well, the now was being multiplied. And if you multiply it by 1.007, you can see here that the calculator automatically brings up this word answer. Okay, so where we would usually have said 1.007 times the now, the calculator, if you just hit the multiplication button, automatically brings up answer, which we were told we needed to basically use instead of the word now. So what else was going on in our equation besides just the 1.007 times the now, or in our case times answer? There was a plus 9. I'm going to hop back to the calculator just to finish that up, and we're going to press plus 0.9. Now, when we hit enter here, what this is doing is it's predicting next year's population. So that's our first year's prediction right there. I'm going to hop back over here, just kind of update us where we're at. And we can see exactly what's expected of us in the next step. It says hit enter. Each time you hit enter, you perform the iteration again. So if you remember last time, we were predicting the populations all the way up through, I believe it was 1996. So I'm going to set myself up with a table to do those same predictions. Okay, I'm going to put the year here and the population here. And what I'm going to do is start us out at 1990. And remember, 1990 was my 248 million as my starting population. And then 1991 then would be the first year's prediction, which if we look back at our calculator, was 250.636 million. Now notice here I'm going to put the label millions on my population each time because I need to remember that it's not 250 people, it's 250 million people. And when we hop back to our calculator, you'll notice that every time I hit enter, it's going to re-perform that calculation. And your calculator may look a little bit different than mine. Mine here will say answer times 1.007 plus 0.9 over and over again each time. Yours may just show this number and then the next number and so on. But we should be getting the same numbers each time we hit enter. And each time we hit enter, we're advancing one more year. So if this was 1990, this is 1991, then this is 1992, and so on. So I'm just going to hit enter a couple more times until I can see a few more years. This would be 1993, 1994, and now I need to copy these ones down before they disappear. Okay, so you can see I've copied up to 1994, so then I'm ready to advance my calculator just for the last 2 years up to 1996. And I'll go ahead and copy these down, 261.36, and if I was going to round this, it would round up to a 6, and 264.095. And at this point, I've now predicted the populations up to 1996, which was my goal. So this is just an example of how iteration can get us through these predictions a lot faster than doing them manually every time. Another thing we can do for iteration is we could say something like, when will the population reach 300 million people? And then what we would do is just hop back to our calculator and continue to hit enter until we got a population that went over 300. Now when you have problems like that, you have to be very careful to count because it might take a lot of times to reach that number, and you want to make sure you're counting carefully because you can't necessarily scroll back up in your calculator, particularly with our TI-83s. So just an idea of other ways that you might see iteration, but again, iteration is a process for us to perform the calculations much quicker than we could manually using our now next equations. I hope this video helped you understand iteration. Thanks for joining me.